Okay, this is part question, part opinion. In podcast 13, you stated effectively, not explicitly, that jiu-jitsu is the martial art that takes the most time to become proficient. I disagree, and here's why. As a wrestler, I've been able to pick up jiu-jitsu in a matter of about 2 months, to the point where I can submit a blue belt here and there. I mostly control purple belt, possibly there is wide skill range along belts, which I only roll with lower level players. I might just be a bad teacher, but I've not had as much success teaching jiu-jitsu guys to wrestle. After the same amount of time, there may be a low, high school wrestling level. I found it extremely difficult to teach jiu-jitsu players to shoot, penetrate with their hips, or effectively use their hips to defend us or scramble. Possibly my sample size is too small to form an accurate opinion, but I'm curious of your thoughts on the topic. Thanks, love listening and learning.
So, yeah, I guess when I said that, I should have said grappling in general, which is definitely harder to achieve a basic level of competence in rather than striking. Now, don't get me wrong. You take a skilled boxer, they will destroy an unskilled boxer. You take a skilled Muay Thai guy, they will destroy an unskilled Muay Thai guy. You've trained with good Muay Thai people before,
yes,
right? The first person that I ever did that with that was a skilled Muay Thai, legit skilled Muay Thai, it was like black belt versus white belt, right?
Yeah.
I would think about throwing a kick at him, and he would check it,
yeah,
right? And then he would throw a kick at me before I even knew what was happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're that much better. They can see your hips. They move. It's the same thing with boxing. If you go against a good boxer, they'll jack you up. In that sport, right? In that sport, you will get worked. So... Now, that being said, a good wrestler is a good grappler. You are a good grappler, and that's why you're able to pick up jiu-jitsu very quickly, because wrestling is grappling, which is jiu-jitsu. Are there differences? Yes, there absolutely are differences. But it's like longboard surfing and shortboard surfing. If you're or baseball and softball. If you played baseball in college, when you get out on the office softball team, you're a killer. That's the way it is. It's because you played baseball. You didn't play technically softball. It's the same thing with wrestling. And as far as the fact that it doesn't take long to learn, if you're a high-level wrestler, to learn jiu-jitsu, yes, absolutely. You'll learn it very quickly. Look at the history of the UFC. Dan Severn, Mark Coleman, Kevin Randleman, Randy Couture, Tito, all those high-level wrestlers. And that's the history, because guess what? High-level wrestlers are there right now, too. John Jones, DC. It's wrestlers. It's wrestlers and wrestlers. Now, are there other guys that come in and fill it? But the I would say the majority base is wrestling.
Yeah.
So now you also have to look, speaking of history, you have to look at the early UFCs, or you go to any gym. And the fact is, a jiu-jitsu only guy beats a wrestling only guy in a fight 9 times out of 10. That's the way it is. Now, if the wrestler can learn very quickly, but if the wrestler only knows wrestling and the jiu-jitsu guy only knows jiu-jitsu, the jiu-jitsu guy is going to win. Simply because the wrestler doesn't know how to finish the fight. He doesn't know how to finish it. He doesn't have any submission holds to finish a fight. So can they occasionally 9 times, 1 time out of 10 or whatever, get something? And yes, that can happen. But And also, I'm not talking about if you take a NCAA wrestler,
right,
and you put him against a white belt, or maybe even a blue belt, there's a chance that the blue belt can't submit him. The guy's just too strong. That's if he has some awareness. If he has no awareness whatsoever, he's going to get tapped out.
Yeah.
And if you watch the early UFCs, that's exactly what happened. The wrestlers, they might get positioned, but they were getting choked, they were getting tapped. And you go to any gym right now, you have a tough wrestler walk in that doesn't know any jiu-jitsu, he's going to get tapped out. I mean, for instance, right now at our gym, we got a really good wrestler named Taylor Johnson, and I'll bring his name up because I can remember it all because it's all been recent. He's been training now for less than a year. When he first came in, he was getting tapped out. That's the way it is. He's a phenomenal wrestler. 2 months later, he wasn't getting tapped out. 6 months later, he's tapping people out. Mm-hmm. So that's what happens. But if you take physically kind of close people and you put pure wrestling against pure jiu-jitsu, jiu-jitsu is going to win. Now, there's also another thing that you're probably noticing in this situation, and that is that wrestling selects for athleticism. Right? Wrestling selects for athleticism. And for you to be competitive in wrestling, you need to be strong, quick, athletic, agile. All those things are important. And I've seen that, with the school where my kids wrestle, and you see it, what it's like when you get a strong athletic kid and how they're able to execute moves better than someone that's not that good of an athlete. Mm-hmm. And so wrestling does that. Wrestling is selective. So if you wrestled, guess what? You're a really good athlete. And if you did well wrestling or you wrestled for a long time, you developed that athleticism because you had to be explosive. You had to train hard. So that's that. Also, blue belts, you look at a blue belt is basically a person that's been doing jiu-jitsu for a year, maybe 2 years, right? So that's the same thing as a lower level high school wrestler, right? A low level high school wrestler is a guy that didn't start wrestling until he was a freshman year. Started wrestling. Well, that's a low level high school wrestler. And guess what? He's getting beat. So you should be, if you're a good wrestler, you should be able to, once you understand the basic principles of jiu-jitsu, you should be able to beat blue belts because they're a year into the game. That's the way it is. You take a competitive wrestler and you go against somebody that's, 7 years in and now they're a brown belt. Well, that's a competitive high school wrestler. That's a senior and he started training in 6th grade. That's 7-8 years. Go against a 7 or 8 year jiu-jitsu guy. You've got a good match. Mm-hmm. And likely the jiu-jitsu guy is going to win. Now, again, if you take a pure wrestler versus pure jiu-jitsu, the jiu-jitsu guy is going to win all day. All day. So, there's no denying, and like I just said, there's a reason that wrestling is the premier skill set in the UFC that predicts champions. No doubt about it. It is a great and incredible martial art. I wish that wrestling had kept its roots as catch wrestling and still had submission holds and all that, because it would just completely change the game. But it doesn't, so you have to add them later. There's also something else too where I think that people in general, wrestling's not for everybody, right? It's a very hard sport. And I think that people avoid that grind of, as far as okay, you're going to get good at wrestling now. I'm a jiu-jitsu guy. Now I'm going to make you good at wrestling. Jiu-jitsu guys avoid the grind. I shouldn't say all of them, but some, often, jiu-jitsu guys avoid the grind of the takedowns and the intensity of wrestling. They're not looking for that. That's one of the things that makes jiu-jitsu appealing to a very broad range of people, is that you can train it at a mellower pace, right? Mm-hmm. And that's also why if you go to jiu-jitsu tournaments, wrestlers do really well in jiu-jitsu tournaments because they understand the intensity of rounds, of limited time, of smashing someone, of going all out. Jiu-jitsu guy that's been training in the gym, they ain't ready for that first tournament. There's no jiu-jitsu guy in the gym that goes to the first tournament and says, yeah, that was just like what I thought it was going to be like. No, they're not used to that intensity. They're not ready for it. So, and of course, not taken away from jiu-jitsu guys that train like madmen with total intensity and get after it super hard too, because those guys exist as well. And also, last little thing on this, there are also some wrestlers that don't adapt to the slower pace of jiu-jitsu. They can't adapt to that, and they don't adapt to the slower pace of MMA, and so their whole career, they gas out. And there's plenty of pro MMA fighters, UFC, that have come in, high-level wrestlers, that they couldn't ever quite make the transition to MMA. So, bottom line, these are points that I pretty much agree with that this guy made. And wrestling's awesome. I think it's a great base. I think it's a form of grappling, and it complements jiu-jitsu, and jiu-jitsu complements it. And I wish that it was one sport.
Yeah.
But it's not. So you have to do both.
Yeah. And it seems like because he was originally not complaining, wasn't complaining, but his premise was that, jiu-jitsu is not in fact the hardest one to master. Wrestling, he's implying that wrestling is harder to master, because he taught jiu-jitsu guys wrestling and they didn't pick it up.
Right.
That was kind of it. In jiu-jitsu, you can break all kinds of wrestling rules in jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
But wrestling guys, when they'll come in, if they have to learn to break some wrestling rules. Otherwise, it's going to be their detriment. Sure, a lot of them carry over.
Right.
A lot of the strength and explosive sit-outs and stuff.
I see what you're saying.
But man, if a wrestler can't break the rule to go to his back, because a lot of wrestlers will give up their back all day because they don't want to go on their back, and that's why they're going to get choked all the time. But if, like Taylor, that's a good example, bro. He broke that rule quick, and that's why he's so good, because he can expand his mind and break that rule. So, but consider the jiu-jitsu guy, right? Now he has to learn all these, so he has to essentially, and not so much break the rule, he has to probably break some rules, by not going his back, whatever. But a jiu-jitsu guy doesn't have to break any jiu-jitsu rules necessarily. So it's like, wait, why am I going to do this?
Case in point, how much time and effort am I going to put into learning a takedown correctly when it barely decides the match?
Exactly right. When you don't have to.
There's a mental gap into the desire for knowledge, because if you take me down, cool, I'm going to guillotine you. You're not going to pass my guard. Whereas when a wrestler shows up, he has to learn this stuff. Otherwise, he's losing. He's getting tapped out. He's getting choked.
Yep.
So that's a great point there.
Yeah.
Very true.
So, yeah.
You don't have to, and even when you say, okay, jiu-jitsu should focus more on takedowns, and it's really cool, and you should definitely focus on takedowns. You got to learn them, and it's very important. But at the back of your mind, as a jiu-jitsu guy,
I might just pull guard.
Yeah, I don't really care if you take me down. It's okay.
And then now we're talking about, in this case,
I'm not saying that me personally, because I don't like.
Right. I'm just saying potentially. And here's the thing: to even add to that, if you're considering the comparison of wrestling and jiu-jitsu, take the takedown situation. Not all takedowns are quote unquote wrestling takedowns. I can be like, okay, I can not learn wrestling at all and still be good at takedowns if I learn judo, or if I learn something else. So again, it's basically you're taking something really vast with a lot of easy ways to maneuver around certain techniques and still be vastly successful. And then you're basically saying, okay, let's take a person who has that approach, and narrow it down to this much more difficult approach and way less effective approach. Essentially, it's the vastness of grappling. I can still be successful in grappling without learning XYZ wrestling moves. And then you want to teach them these XYZ wrestling moves, probably some that can go against you, especially when it comes to energy conservation and all this other stuff. Yeah. That's why a guy maybe... Yeah, it might be difficult to learn that, but how you said there's a gap in the motivation to learn. So it's difficult to want to learn or care about learning this thing when it's going to serve me less in my grappling.
No doubt. You can just look at the human facts of jiu-jitsu. There's a reason why takedowns are not emphasized very much in jiu-jitsu at a normal academy.
Right.
A normal academy, they do not have the focus on takedowns like wrestling. Wrestling, the takedown wins you. It doesn't win you the match automatically, but that's a huge part of wrestling is getting the takedowns. Jiu-jitsu, it's a little tiny percentage of the match. Does it give you 2 points? Yeah, but it doesn't mean anything to me because I'm going to submit you.
Yeah, so. and just the nature of the game. Wrestling is takedown, pin. There's more to it. I understand, but jiu-jitsu is just submit the guy. So jiu-jitsu in a way, it's like just get it to the ground. You can win off your back. You can win from the top. You can win. Wrestling's not like that.
Yeah, I mean, people literally pull
guard and then win from their back.
All
Spend
the time.
0 seconds on top, zero, and win the match.
And so the fact that you can pull guard gives you this entire out to get away from doing takedowns, and you can still be victorious very, very often. Yeah,
and that goes along with these techniques that he mentioned, like hip. Basically, there's a lot of moves in there. They're big moves, and they do help you. But like I said, they're simply not necessary. I mean, any physical move is helpful to know and know how to defend, whether it be from offensive, or defense position. But again, if you're trying to narrow it down and teach these guys who their approach and their knowledge comes from the vastness of grappling, and you want to narrow it down to this thing, it may or may not work, and it may or may not serve you. It could work against you, but here, let's try to learn this real hard. Yeah, you're going to have that gap in motivation.
Yeah, those guys actually don't care about the takedowns.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go on record now as saying this. Just because jiu-jitsu doesn't focus on takedowns doesn't mean that you shouldn't focus. You should learn takedowns. You need to know takedowns from a self-defense perspective, from an MMA perspective. Takedowns, wrestling, you have to do it. I mean, that's why my kids wrestle, It's because I didn't wrestle, and I hate that fact. Because I go against like he's saying, I go against a good high school wrestler, it's hard for me to take him to the ground, You get somebody that wrestled in college, I know I'm not going to. Now, I have developed good takedown defense over the years, and it's actually takedown offense because I have offensive ways of defending the takedown. I'm going to throw submissions and stuff, but I can't go back in time and go through the training that you get when you're a high school wrestler and a college wrestler. I can't do that. I can't do it. I mean, I just don't have the time and the motivation to do it because I'm in the same boat as what the guy that you're just talking about. How much time am I going to focus on takedowns? I know I go against a college wrestler, he's taking me down. I go against a good high school wrestler, there's a good chance he's taking me down.
Yeah.
So how much time and effort? I mean, I could spend the next 5 years, I could go through a competitive circuit, I could join the wrestling club, but am I going to do that right now? Is that time effective, or do I just want to get better at jiu-jitsu? And then have access to the rest of the grappling spectrum that you just talked about? Well, it's an obvious choice. I'm going to focus on the spectrum that has the most application in every situation I'm going to be in.
Yeah.
So if you get the chance, wrestle as much as you can. Learn your takedowns, drill your takedowns, put your kids into wrestling. Jiu-jitsu for sure. Put your kids into wrestling.
Yeah.
They don't have to worry about it then.
Yeah. The fact remains, some people, they don't want that beef, where you got to go and wrestle. That's hard, And even like a wrestling, you can have a wrestling style to your jiu-jitsu, you know? But again, if you don't want that.
You know who didn't wrestle? Craig Baker.
Yeah.
Didn't wrestle.
Yeah.
If you train with him, you'll be like, where did you wrestle in college is what you'll be thinking. He's pure jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
Didn't wrestle in college.
Yep.
Didn't wrestle in high school.
Yeah.
Didn't even wrestle in high school. He feels like a total wrestler when you train with him.
Absolutely.
And his takedowns are great.
Yeah.
And there's some Brazilian guys that have come up, that Brazilian UFC fighters that are very good wrestlers that never wrestled before. They have really good takedowns.
Yeah.
But you're gonna have to work for that. And these kids that come out of high school, that wrestled in high school, they got it.
Yeah.
It's a little gift.
That work has been put in.
Yes. Yeah. Little gift that they got.
Yeah. But for these guys, and back to the question, for these guys that he's trying to teach, and he totally says, like, it could be my sample size. I understand. And that's a good point, actually. But because the sample size be big, you can get guys like Craig, they'll pick that stuff up real quick. Yep. But at the end of the day, when it comes to, as he put it, when it comes time to shoot, penetrate with their hips, or effectively use their hips to defend or scramble, you can omit all of those things from a jiu-jitsu guy, and he can still win and be vastly successful. So
scramble. You got scramble's a questionable one. You have to be able to scramble.
But again, I mean,
let me. Scrambling is a very good, valuable thing to have in jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, agree.
Much more valuable than being able to penetrate on a shot.
Yeah, agree. But yeah, wrestlers, right? That's such an interesting one, bro. I roll with this. I feel bad that I forget his name, but I roll with him every time I see him. And he's smaller than me. I give him maybe 165, maybe, but an awesome wrestler. New guy too, under 1 year. And his game is wrestling, but he's like high level wrestler, you know. So if I play the wrestling game, and I know wrestling, like I'm solid, I can wrestle against good wrestlers. Maybe not Taylor, but good wrestlers. So I can play, and I'm bigger than him, you know. So if I go and wrestle this guy, bro, he like
he runs game on you.
Yeah, he'll run his game.
Of course.
But if I just slow down in my mind, be like, okay, he's a wrestler, then let's work around the wrestling. Oh, no problem. Yeah, you know. But if he can give up the wrestling rules, you know how you do. Because he has that athleticism, he can switch his hips like all quick, base just like he's built into the ground. That's how good his base is, you know. Anyway, but yeah, wrestling.
Yeah, awesome. And I guess from a human nature perspective here, if you were to apply this to other situations in life, think about when you're trying to get people to do things, think about the motivation that they have in their head. Not motivation of like, hey, let's go, but the actual mental motivation of what they're going to gain from what you're trying to give them, and do they see the reason of why it's important?
Yeah, very good.
Got to apply that across the board.
Jiu-Jitsu is life.
Wrestling is life.
Wrestling is life.
Grappling
is life.